Hi, and welcome to the Life of Five podcast. In today's episode, we are talking about the talk. That's right, the talk, how to talk about sex with your kids. We're going to get into all the details.
Yeah, maybe your kids are getting older and you know that it's time. You need to have a serious discussion with them about sex, but you're just not sure how to do it. Did you ever have the talk from your parents when you were a kid? Was it awkward, uncomfortable? Did it even make a difference?
Oh my goodness, I can actually remember this. I was probably like 11, 12 years old, and my dad set me down. I remember on the edge of my bed, and he just tried so hard to have this talk. And it was awkward, and he didn't really get into any of the details. It was just kind of like all this like big theory stuff. And I know he wanted to say stuff, but he was so uncomfortable, and it was just awkward. And we literally never talked about sex ever again after that moment. That was it. That was my one introduction to the talk.
Amazing. Yeah, I would say my experience was similar. My mom didn't really give a lot of detail, but she did give me a couple of books. One was on puberty and one was on sex. And then I remember one time having a conversation about the basic mechanics of sex, but that was it. It wasn't really something that we talked about at length or often.
You want to go into that right now, the basic mechanics?
No, not so much.
Different episode.
I hope not.
That's a really future episode. Anyway, but we're not trying to give our parents a hard time. No. We understand it is hard. It's difficult. If you're listening, mom, dad, out there, we love you, right? We care about you deeply, but it's difficult. And so I think this is something that's important that we all talk about, and we want to have that discussion. So how do we go about really having the talk?
Yeah, well, I think first we need to back up. And before we start talking to our kids about sex, we really need to be talking to each other about sex, right? Get on the same page. In fact, one thing that we strongly encourage when we meet with couples for premarital sessions, we talk about, that you have to have an open dialogue about sex, about your expectations, what you like, what you don't like, just so that you're on the same page. Because if you're uncomfortable talking to each other about sex, you're for sure going to be uncomfortable talking to your kids about sex.
Yeah, that's so good. I think that's really important to understand that if we can't talk about it, certainly we're going to be uncomfortable talking about it with our kids. But then the other thing is we want to break down the myth that it's just a talk, right? Because it's not. It's a series of talks. It's an ongoing conversation that you want to have with your kids throughout their childhood, because you want them to know that you're a trusted place that they can come, because there are going to be questions that they have. There are going to be times that you need to have those conversations, and you really want to be able to do that for a good period of their life.
Yeah, and I'd say you really want to start early with having age-appropriate discussions with your kids about their bodies, about what to expect as they get older, all those kinds of things. And I'll say that this has become a lot easier for me when we had our girls. Like, I don't, talk with my boys a whole lot about their bodies. Ray usually handles that, but my girls, they're interested in it. Our 9-year-old, has lots of questions about her period, which is just super fun to me. So we get to talk about these things a lot, but I think you really have to start with coming from a place that, God created our bodies. He made man, he made woman, and he made them with intention and beauty. And he said that our bodies are good. So we have to start from a place of, there's lots of shame in the world about bodies, body image. You're too fat, you're too thin, all the things. But we really want to start from a place of, no, our bodies are good. This is how God made them, and really start those conversations early with our kids.
Yeah, that's really good. And I love that Carol does have those conversations with the girls. I will say, listen, guys out there, if maybe you're in a situation where you got to have that conversation with your girls, maybe you're a single parent, maybe mom's not in the picture, whatever, you can have those conversations. It's probably just some things that you need to maybe get some wisdom on from some other people so you know how to speak into that. But I do have those conversations with my boys, and with all three of them throughout, their childhood. I've just had those opportunities really to take them out and to have a conversation. We'll go like Dairy Queen, it's just, we can have a conversation low key. Usually it's later at night, so there's not a lot of people. It's blizzards and body parts, right? You're just talking about different stuff, getting down into the details of all that, because they have questions. And so it's not necessarily like this really intense conversation that's super memorable, maybe even to them, but it's just opening up the dialogue dialogue so we can have that discussion as time goes on and try to do a lot of listening in that time. Are there questions maybe that they want to ask? You can tell, but they're not asking. I'm going to kind of present that and put it out there for them so they don't have to take that step. And I'm trying to just take some of that weight off their shoulders.
Yeah. And when we go to share things with our kids, we want to make sure that we're emphasizing principles rather than just practices. If we just give them a long list of things to do or not to do, I mean, they're going to turn us out pretty quickly, but we really want to bring the focus back and make sure that they understand why, not just what to do and what not to do, but why that's important and why it matters. Because one day they are going to be married, and we really do believe that God made it a gift to be experienced between a husband and a wife, and we want them to understand just how great it can be within those boundaries that God set up.
Yeah. And I think, we talk a lot about this word vision, and you want to help give them a vision, not only for marriage, but also for what sex and is intended to be. And we believe that waiting to have sex until you're married honors God. And we also believe that this is God's best for your life. Now, it doesn't mean that if maybe they're in a situation where they've already had sex, and that's going to be another conversation. We're not going to get too much into that here. But if they've already had sex, it doesn't mean that we need to shame or guilt them in any way. We know that through Jesus, there's forgiveness, there's healing, there's hope in all of that. But we do want to present, a biblical worldview and talk to them about the difference between love and lust. Maybe you want to hit on that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, we live in a culture that really emphasizes lust, right? What looks good, what feels right in the moment. And biblically, we just don't see that. It's really about loving and honoring. And we see that the biblical definition of love is to put each other first and to really honor God, not just honor God with our bodies, but honor each other, to remember that, you want to save yourself for your spouse and be able to present the best foot forward going into your marriage and not carry a bunch of baggage along with you, because we see that often as well.
Yeah, that's probably one of my greatest frustrations, is that culture just says, you do you, right? Like, live your own truth. And they talk about sex in a romantic way, and they never really talk about the reality of the heartbreak that so many people go through. And I can tell you, sitting on the other side of a desk or sitting next to somebody who's, maybe had some infidelity in their life, or maybe it was just something they did before marriage and now they're feeling the shame, the guilt of what they've done, or they're with another person now and they're trying to explain something in their past. I've had those conversations, and they are heartbreaking, and they are so difficult and so hard. And again, does God bring hope through them? Absolutely. But I think for so many people, I'd rather them just avoid that pain, because God has something so much more for them.
Yeah. And then in today's world, you're going to have some harder questions from your kids too. They'll have questions about their sexual identity, gender issues, all these things that they're hearing from all the voices in their world. And, we have to be prepared for that.
Right.
So we have to come researched and prayed up and ready to go. But we also have to be willing to admit that we don't have all the answers to their questions. And when they ask us something that we're not ready for, to be willing to admit it and say, I'm not sure, but I'm going to find out. Let's do some research and we'll talk about it again. But just coming with that heart and that attitude, we want to help them navigate this world as best as we can, and we have to be prepared.
Yeah, and I think that really shows that we care, right? Like when we say, hey, I don't know, but let's find out. Like, let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's ask some questions. That's really important. And it shows that you're interested in the questions that they have, and not just spouting off, whatever comes off the top of your head, which might not be right always. And so that's really important. And I would say, in addition to honoring God with our bodies, I also have conversations with our teenagers to help them think through the ramifications of like whatever that belief that maybe one person settles upon. Because again, if everyone can live their own truth, what happens when two truths collide?
Yeah.
Who gets to choose who's right and who's wrong? So you say you're right and I say I'm right, and like what's going to happen there? And so that's why we say it's really just best to say, okay, what does God say? Yeah. And then we're going to trust that. It's not always the easiest thing, by the way. In fact, sometimes I'm like, God, I wish you made it a little bit easier. It would be just like take some of the complications away. Mm-hmm. But God's way is best, not because he's trying to like restrict us and keep us from love. He is love. So he wants the best for us. And I want to listen to a heavenly Father who wants the best for me.
That's so good. Yeah, but we have some tips for you to get started in this conversation about sex with your kids. And the first is to start earlier than you even think you should. You can start very young with your kids, just having open conversations about their bodies, about what they're going to experience as they grow up and become men and women, and how wonderful that is. But we want to start early so that it's a normal part of our conversations, so it's not super awkward when we get to talk about those deeper things.
Yeah, and studies show that most parents start too late.
Yeah.
That's just proven to be true. And then the other side of that is like we just say things in our like Carol the other day was just saying the word penis. I think it had to do with some food or something that looked a little bit like something.
It was in context.
Yeah.
But.
So and I think our boys got a little bit uncomfortable, but like when we do that, we kind of break down the walls and the barriers. And so it just makes it like, it might be awkward. I mean, we're not doing that around their friends or anything, but but around our kids, they know like we can talk. It's a safe place to talk about those things.
Yeah, definitely.
And then another thing we would tell you as a tip is just to educate yourself.
Yeah.
Listen to podcasts, read some books, and we'll put a link with some descriptions of some people that we really trust and some great resources in our description. So make sure to check that out.
Yeah, and embrace the uncomfortable, because there are going to be uncomfortable topics, uncomfortable moments, but we don't want that to be a barrier or a hindrance to having conversations, honest conversations with our kids. So just know that there are going to be moments when you don't feel comfortable, but we got to do it anyway.
Yeah. And then another one is don't make it about you. Watch your reaction. You know, I can say this for sure, as a youth pastor. We were in youth ministry for about 15 years. And so I had a lot of conversations with guys who maybe for the first time ever were telling me that, you know, like, hey, I watched some porn or something like that, or I did this, or I did that, or I had sex with this girl. And so I think a lot of times, though, they would say, like, I thought you would respond in such a, different way. You just seem to be, so receptive. And I was like, listen, I want the best for you. I'm not happy that you're having to struggle through this, but I want you to know I'm here for you. And so if you come across just shocked and like, oh my goodness, how could you? And I've seen parents do this, sadly, with their kids. Like, I'm in the room when they find out and they just like, I can't believe you. Like, you shut down the conversation. You put up walls. That's not going anywhere. And so what you want to do is keep those lines of conversation open so you can keep having dialogue.
Yeah. And it's really important to remember that we're not trying to force everything into just one or two discussions with our kids. You have to allow time. You have to take it slow. And that's why we say it's so important to start early, because you really want to build on these conversations and just make it a normal part of life, that this is something that we talk about in our home.
Yeah, and if you haven't, maybe your kids are a little bit older, start now. Don't hesitate. Just get on that conversation. A few action steps that we want to leave with you. The first one is really about you. Take time to evaluate your relationship with sex. What do you think about it? How do you perceive it? Is it something that's a positive? Maybe is there some shame in your past that's attached to it? Does it make it difficult to talk about it with your kids because your sexual history was less than stellar? If there's stuff you need to work through, go see somebody and talk with them so that you can get to that place where you can have a healthy conversation with your kids. It matters and it's important to them and they need you. Mom, dad, they need you a lot. And so make sure you're willing to take those steps to get to that right place.
Yeah. And the next action step is to talk to your spouse. Get on the same page when it comes to sex and what you want to be talking to your kids about on that topic, because it's so important. We don't want to be sending our kids mixed messages. So we really, and like we said, usually the boys are going to go to Ray, the girls are going to come to me. But if my boys do come to me with questions, I want to make sure that I can answer them in a thoughtful way and in a way that is going to be pointing them toward the ideas and the beliefs about sex that we want them to have with a biblical worldview. And we just want to be on the same page when we do that.
Yeah, and maybe they're just coming to, maybe my boys are coming to Carol or our girls are coming to me because they want to see the perspective of the opposite sex.
Yeah.
And so there are going to be those opportunities. And then that last thing is, I kind of already touched about it, but start the conversation. Just do it. Like, don't wait. There's going to be a million things you're going to want to do to prepare, but just start having that conversation. Again, you don't have to jam pack it all into one conversation. I hope that takes a weight off your shoulders. Maybe you've been like, like, I've been dreading this moment. You know, maybe it was like my dad, and like, I'm sure it took all the courage and strength he had to be able to just come and sit next to me on the side of my bed and have that conversation, as awkward and weird and maybe not as in depth as it needed to be. And maybe you're there. So just take the pressure off and ask a few questions, and we'll kind of set some questions down below again that you can ask so you can start that conversation with your kids.
Yeah, so grab that download that we have for you with questions for your kids, and they're kind of laid out in order of age. But look through those, see maybe where your kids are at. Maybe you need to go deeper, faster, but you kind of gauge where you're at. We hope that'll be a helpful tool for you to get the conversation started.
Yeah, there's some great questions there. Like, can you explain the best position for sex? I'm just kidding.
Whoa.
I'm just kidding. That's a future episode again. I really enjoy any episode that we get to talk about sex. It's fantastic.
Oh my goodness.
Some of you are like, I can't trust that guy at all. Are you getting redder?
Probably.
But seriously, I want to say thank you so much for joining us on this episode. I really do pray and hope that we've helped to maybe alleviate some of the pressure that you felt coming in. But if you still have questions, drop a comment below. We would love to be able to offer any wisdom that we can give. Or if, maybe there's some resources we can point you to, we'd love to do that as well. Yeah. As always, make sure to like the video. That helps us to just reach more people. Subscribe, click that bell to get notified of future episodes. But we want to say thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next time.